to say that we're live. Okay, so members, you're very welcome to this afternoon's Executive Office Committee meeting. If I could begin with item 1, which is the apologies. Clerk, do we have any apologies?
Just if George isn't here yet, he said he may be delayed.
Okay, thank you very much. Chairman's business, I'll just move on today because I know we have a couple of items that are racked up, so and we have a busy matters arising list. So go to item 3, please, the draft minutes. The draft minutes of the meeting that was held on the 17th of February are page 6 of the meeting pack. Are members content that that is a true reflection of those proceedings? I might just get Michael, you to go on to yep, perfect. So item 4 then, matters arising, are on page 15 of the meeting pack, and there is a response from the Executive Office regarding the virtual meeting of the European Commission Vice President with a number of organisations in Northern Ireland. Would members agree maybe that we should write to the Northern Ireland office just to find out how the meeting was organised and how these were selected? Okay, I think I'm going to go with, if members are happy enough with that. Then on page 17 of the meeting pack is a list of the matters that were raised during the closed session with the EU Affairs members last week and the related documents. So just to confirm with members that future briefings of the EU Affairs Manager will take place in public session. That's the first thing, and that the transcript of the evidence session with the European Commission Vice President to the Oireachtas Joint Committee on European Union Affairs, which was referred to in the EU Affairs Manager's briefing, is included in the relevant papers for today's Junior Ministers session. There were a number of actions that were suggested from last week, one of which was to ask the Committee for the Economy if that committee has undertaken any of the Business Engagement Forum, and also for us to write to the Westminster Parliament in relation to the participation of the Northern Ireland Assembly in the Parliamentary Partnership Assembly, which is envisaged under the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. Are members agreeable to those actions?
Yep.
Okay. Then on page 24 of the meeting pack is an overview of the issues that were raised by the Northern Ireland Youth Forum at last week's meeting. Members, the committee has written to the Speaker to ask for an update in the Youth Assembly, and the Clerk has been investigating ways in which the committee can better engage with young people in the future. But could I get your agreement to write to the Minister of Education to the Minister of Education to ask that the mental health issues be embedded into the curriculum, and to support the request from the Northern Ireland Youth Forum to meet to present the key issues for students across Northern Ireland? Members being agreed to that?
Chair, can we also hello?
I can hear a voice, but I can't see who it is. Is that you, Christopher?
Yes, it is. It's not the voice of God. I was just wanting to say, could we circulate that also to the Minister for Health?
That's my next line. The next one is to write to the Minister for Health to ask that a portion of the COVID funding be used to help support the voluntary sector in delivering vital mental health services, which I think is a follow-on. But maybe that issue of the Minister of Education previously could be copied to the Minister for Health as well, at Christopher's suggestion there. And then if we could write to the Minister for the Economy to ask that the meeting with the Our Voices group be rescheduled as soon as possible. That was due to take place, but it was obviously postponed. But if we could encourage that. And then finally, if we could write First and Deputy First Minister to ask that the Executive ensure that young people's basic human rights are met and upheld in light of the COVID-19 impact on current policies, and that the Youth Press Conference is rescheduled as a matter of urgency. Would there be agreement in that broadly? Okay, that's grand. Okay, then members, we move on then to the next item, which is the departmental spending plan, and we have an oral evidence session from departmental officials. And if we could get brought up into the spotlight, please, we should have Dr. Mark Brown, Nelia Lloyd and Tara Kennedy, if those are there. I think we're seeing some of them. Excellent. And we will maybe get your, yeah, I think, is Tara there okay?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Yeah, okay, excellent. That's good. Good. Okay. Okay, so Mark, we'll pass over to yourself maybe to make an initial presentation. We will, of course, again congratulate you on your recent promotion and change of job, moving away from us, which we will, of course, miss the opportunity to have these presentations and questioning and answering sessions. I'm sure you'll do a great job over in education. It's it's a very big and busy department, and especially at the moment, and it will be a very difficult task. But we certainly wish you all the best in that. I'll continue to at all times extol youth services, which is a responsibility of the Department of Education, and know that you will give it the suitable priority and prominence that it should definitely get, as being a fabulous sector delivering for young people in Northern Ireland. And indeed, we have just in our action sheets there discussed the inputs that we had from quite a number of young people last week. It was always refreshing to hear from them. But I know that you'll do a great job for that. And I'll wait until after the presentation before I berate the fact that we don't have a paper. But I'll leave that one until after you've given us your presentation. So, Mark, we'll pass over to yourself for one final time. And I get to say once again, one final time, that you're still on mute. Should you? No, I'm the only one. I think that's maybe if the comms team are there, if there's some issue just to getting Mark unmuted there, please, if you could help. Okay, just 1 second. Okay, yeah. But it's just like Mark, the report doesn't say anything, and because we don't have it, and now you're not able to say anything. Well, they're suggesting that you are off mute. It may be your headset. I know personally I had the problem today where I had to just completely unplug them and just use the natural microphone of the computer, if that's maybe an option. No. No. Do you want to maybe just try unplugging the headphones and just using the ordinary? Okay. So, okay, well, we're going to have to maybe try and see if we can get matters fixed here. It would appear that there is some problem. He did try unplugging his microphone and headset there, and there still wasn't any sound. But I do see that he has now been taken out of the spotlight, which may allow him to get rebooted back in and onto the system. So we will see if we give him a little moment or two on that. and if that maybe helps to get him rebooted and back in again. Nelia, is there a written report that could be read out, or? We're not hearing you either, so we can't just blame poor Mark on this. Sure we can't. Okay, folks, what I'm going to do is I'm going to suggest that we take a break for 5 minutes just to see if we can get this sorted out. And if I maybe could just suggest to the comms team there that none of those that are in the spotlight are able to access their microphones at all. So there must be something more central to that. But if I could ask the comms team just to take us off public session until we get the technical problems sorted on at this stage. Yeah, okay. So, folks, thank you very much indeed for bearing with us there. I think there is a vicious rumour that one of these weeks we're going to have a committee meeting without problems, but I'm not sure about that. We'll have to wait and see if that's going to be a possibility. But I understand that now we do have, at this stage, Mark and Tara are definitely able to both hear and speak to us, and we're working on Nelia there as well. So Mark, I'll pass over to yourself then to make your presentation for us, please.
Okay, thanks very much, Chair, and thanks for your very kind comments earlier on. It has been a pleasure working with the committee over the last number of years, and I always expect the committee to ask searching questions, and it's never a problem. It's always been done in a very courteous way, so thank you for that. I do want to start by apologising for the fact that there hasn't been a paper made available to the committee. I know you've promised to berate me afterwards on that. We've done our best to try and get that through. There are just some issues that needed to be resolved that haven't yet been sorted. But I will give an outline of the financial position. I'll be happy to pick up questions after that. So just by way of background, the Minister of Finance announced the Executive's draft budget for 2021 on the 18th of January, which sets out the proposed spending plans for the coming year. Not surprisingly, the budget presents significant challenges for the Executive and for all departments, with a very constrained spending review outcome, particularly in the context of COVID-19. So the draft budget proposals are currently being consulted upon, with views being sought from all interested parties by the 25th of February, which is tomorrow, 2021. And a final budget will then follow once the consultation period closes, and after executive review and agreement, a final budget will be set for next year. In terms of the TEO budget, although the consultation document indicates a 24.3% increase in TEO's Resourcedale budget, and that is arithmetically correct, it's important to note that the draft budget doesn't actually give TEO any additional funding for its business as usual activities. The reason why the funding has gone up in arithmetical terms is because there's some specific additional funding for particular areas, such as the implementation costs for victims' payments, for permanent disablement, for the Historical Institutional Abuse Redress Scheme, and then for smaller items for EU match funding and EU exit. And all of those areas are ring-fenced. In terms of our baseline, TEO's draft budget for next year is essentially a flat cash settlement. So that really means that it really means reductions because we have to take account of increased pay and price costs. In terms of the headline numbers, the total resource budget for the department is 118.4 million. 118.4 million. And that includes some of those very specific allocations I mentioned. So there's 46.2 million to meet the anticipated compensation levels for the Historical Institutional Abuse Redress Board, as well as other associated costs that are flowing from the inquiry. There is 6.7 million, which is to meet the expected implementation costs associated with Victims Payment Scheme for permanent disablement, and that will allow the preparatory work to continue. And then there's 57.8 million, which is our baseline funding to support TEO's annual programmes and projects to pick up on the salary costs and to meet the costs of our arm's length bodies. In addition, then there's EU exit funding of £2.7 million, and there's 0.8 million of funding for the dedicated mechanism. There's also 4.1 million of EU match funding, which is in line with our expectations. So that's the resource budget. And you can see actually from a quick perusal of that, that our baseline is 57.8, our total budget is 118.4. So our budget more or less doubles when you add in all those extra elements to it. And that's a bit of a characteristic of TEO, in that our baseline expands over the year because of the extra functions, whether they are central functions or whether they are additional tasks that we have, which tend to expand our baseline budget quite significantly. In terms of the capital budget, that is set at 15.3 million. So the budget presents a number of challenges for us. I think as a committee will be very aware, TEO is responsible for delivering the Executive's Good Relations Strategy, together building a united community. And that has been resourced centrally through Treasury, through the shared future funding, which was provided as part of the Fresh Start Agreement. Funding has been provided at 60 million over the last 5 years, at an average of £12 million per annum, and that's due to end next month. And this funding has enabled significant progress to be made in communities which need help the most, and it's very important that this support is sustained. Unfortunately, the draft budget does not include a replacement funding stream for shared future funding, and there's simply no scope to provide replacement funding from within existing TEO budgets. So the First Minister and Deputy First Minister have raised this issue and raised their concerns with the Finance Minister. They wrote to him a few weeks ago, and they are currently arranging a meeting to discuss this issue with him. In relation to the Victims Payment Scheme for Permanent Disablement, the committee again will be aware that there's been 6.7 million has been provided to allow for implementation costs, but there's no specific funding for any actual payments to meet the costs of the actual payments to victims. Our baseline funding has been maintained at last year's level of 57.8 million. So there's no uplifts provided for pay or inflation, as I mentioned earlier, and that will be a challenge. So we'll have to manage that while trying to safeguard our programme delivery as far as we can. In terms of the capital allocation, which is 15.3 million, that's a 2.8 million decrease when compared to last year's allocation of 18.1. It's expected that this allocation will allow the department to continue its work on the regeneration of Ebrington, to provide important investment in urban villages, and to ensure that essential health and safety works are carried out on the MLKDC site. So that's the current budget position. Those are the various challenges that present, and we'll obviously be keeping the budgetary position of the department under close scrutiny over the coming weeks and months. So I hope I didn't throw too many figures at the committee there, Chair, and you were able to get down to the key points, and I'm happy to take any questions that you and members would have.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. That's appreciated, and I always appreciate as well the position that officers are put in various times. And look, maybe just to comment more widely on it, the fundamental basics of a democracy is based on checks and balances. And one of the most key balances that can be checked on is how the public purse is spent. And one of the weaponries that there is in keeping those checks is that the committees scrutinise the departmental spending, because we get the budget and we can see the one page that's contained within the budget that has all of those headline figures of what's been spent, but it's the literally drilling down into the detail and saying, what is the 6.7 million being spent on? What is the 0.8? How is that being passed out? Who is it that's being employed? It's that really finer, granular detail that the committee has to be able to move into, and nobody else does that. There's going to be no other elements of the checks and balances that gets in to the level of detail that we do. And the bottom line is that this budget is going onto the floor of the Assembly next week, and we're not going to have had that level of detail because the paper hasn't been presented, and that leaves us at a deficit, and this will have to be raised next week because of not getting it. Again, I understand that it's not you that's withholding that paper from us. But could I ask you, just within the department, what is the formulation of the paper that we haven't received today? How does the department form that? Is that I mean, there was a submission that went obviously to the Department of Finance quite a number of months ago at this stage, and that is the genesis of the paper that we should be receiving today. So how is it can be submitted to the Department of Finance, but it can't be given to us as the scrutinising committee? Where is that little bit of paper of that report currently sitting, and what prevents it from getting to here?
Well, Chair, we did send a general paper to the Department of Finance setting out what our needs were for the coming year, and we then got the budget allocation, and we have been looking at that budget allocation, and obviously there's still some bits of it that are we hope under negotiation, such as the shared future element here, and it's when we are clear about what our final allocation is, that we'll have to take the hard decisions about where the allocations of funding actually go. And we've been looking at various scenarios at the moment. But really, that outline that I gave you in my comments comprised the large bulk of the paper you would have received in any case. There are just a couple of sensitive issues where there were some particular points that had to be expressed in a particular way, and agreement wasn't reached on those. So I would want to assure the committee there's nothing significant and there's nothing substantial that I haven't touched on, and that I'm sure that there's nothing there either that the committee won't be able to raise, and I hope I'll be able to answer in the course of this meeting. But I do appreciate that the committee expects a paper to be here, and I would have liked to be in that position, but unfortunately I'm not.
Okay, well, look, again, I hear what you're saying, but I wonder, was the detail that was missed when it came to the RHI scandal in the small bulk? And that's why it's grand for us to get the large bulk of information. But the purpose of a committee is to be able to examine all of the bulk and all of the detail. And that's why next week it will be incumbent upon me to say in that debate that we haven't been given the information. And I know, Mark, that you have strived to give us as much of the detail as you possibly can, and that is it. But the ministers need to be signing off on it. Is some bits of information that's outstanding. I think it's better for it to say some elements are outstanding, but here is. But just to simply give us nothing is always a concern. But maybe if I move to the victims' pension element that you've mentioned there, could I ask two questions? Number one, where are we in the scheme of trying to determine how much it's going to cost? Has that work been continuing in terms of trying to run models, or are we still in the realms of we won't know until it opens how much it's going to cost?
Well, Chair, there's been quite a lot of work has been going on. As I've briefed the committee before, this is work that we would have expected to have been done when the policy was being determined. That's the time normally this work is done in the form of a business case to support the policy and to support the legislation that is brought forward, and that should have been done by NIO, and that point was made at the time to NIO that should have been done, and a detailed business case wasn't provided. So that has meant when the legislation was passed and we were asked to, or required legally to implement it, that has meant that we've been looking to see, well, what are the costs associated with that, to understand fully to understand the policy in full, to understand who's eligible, and then to work through from that the numbers and then the costs. So I've been through this with the committee before, so I won't rehearse all of the detail of that, but we have been working as best we can across all the sources that we can find. We've been in touch with the MOD, we've been in touch with consultant psychiatrists at Queen's who are experienced in the whole area of psychological injury. We've been in touch with the police, and we've been in touch with other sources, with victims groups, all to try and get the best picture we can of all the various constituent parts that will be able to apply to the scheme. And we've made the best estimates that we can around those. In doing that, some figures are firmer than others. Some we have had to make assumptions as best we can, and so we have produced a range of assumptions, and we've collated a range of figures for the constituent groups, which we have then made available to the Government Actuaries Department, or GAD, Now, GAD then take the assumptions that we give them and they run them through their models, because they have whole life models, so they estimate how long people are going to live, and they can put in various assumptions that we give to them about things like, for example, how many people will take up a lump sum or won't take up a lump sum, and so forth. And so they take our figures, take our assumptions, run them through their models, and they have produced a range of costings. And those are the broad figures that you heard recently in response to some of the questions in the Assembly on Monday, and which form part of the discussions with the Secretary of State. So in broad terms, the range of costs that we have identified on the different assumptions are from the sort of lower or conservative estimate of somewhere around about 600 million to a central estimate of around 850 million. And up to an upper figure we think would be in the region of 1.2 billion. Now that doesn't take account of administrative costs. We reckon administration costs could be somewhere in the region of about 40 million over the first 5 years. And after that, the thing steps down, because you need a smaller admin function to maintain the scheme as it goes on. But because the bulk of payments have been made, that can be scaled down. We haven't costed the detail of that particular element. So that's where we are, Chair. We have done significant work on costs. I know that following the discussion with the Secretary of State, there was some additional analysis that has been asked for, and we're discussing that at the moment.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm sure the government's actuary department are excited about being in the limelight. I'm sure they're a department that's not very often referred to, but and I suppose, look, I this scheme starts to move, you're not going to work out how big a movement it's actually going to be, and therefore they are estimates. But I suppose it's maybe just putting on record that sense of being still somewhat concerned that they're so vast a range there that could fall anywhere. And then just in terms of maybe a smaller question, look, we know there was a meeting yesterday. The sounding seemed to be that there was no determinations from that meeting. However, being involved in talk processes in Northern Ireland, you know that it's not over until it's over, and there's still a little time for that. But is there a plan B that this scheme can commence on the day that it needs to commence, as is defined in law? That legal ruling is there. These people need these payments. Is this able to start regardless of where the money comes from, albeit that then becomes the next issue of where the money comes from?
Well, Chair, the legal judgment has made clear that when determinations are made, victims have a legal right to that payment. So those payments will have to be made, and First and Deputy First have made clear that will happen. The issue remains as to where the funding comes from, but that's something that has been part of the discussions, as you say, with the Secretary of State. In terms of a date for opening, that actually will be determined in terms of the preparations for the scheme and when the scheme is ready to open. And the legal date for that actually follows on from a publication of an announcement in the Belfast Gazette. And then it follows within a certain number of days after. That's the legal way in which it happens. But the important thing is to determine what the date is. Then it goes into the Belfast Gazette, and that's the legal point which the scheme opens for applications. And then determinations will flow as quickly as they are made. So obviously there's work to be done. The applications will come in. There's evidence that needs to be collected. There's some evidence that will need to be substantiated. There's decisions that need to be taken by the panel, and then determinations made. And you'll be familiar about the process from the HIA, where you have to go through this. Now, the HIA was fairly quick, and the first determinations were made within 6 or 7 weeks. This one has more difficulties, I think, associated with it. There's more uncertainty, so it may take a little bit more time for the first determinations to come through. But that will depend a lot on the quality of the information the applicant's able to apply, and how complicated the actual cases turn out to be, and that's what's very hard to actually determine.
Okay, Mark, thank you for that. Can I move then to the Deputy Chair, to Doug Beattie? If we could bring Doug up into the spotlight, and then Doug can ask his questions there. Go on ahead, Doug.
Thank you, Chair. Mark, thank you for that. Can I just carry on the theme a little bit, please, of what the Chair started? Because I'm with him. I mean, the costs that we're talking about here are so vast and such a wide range of 600 million to 1.2 billion. It's a staggering. So we're really saying 20 million a year or 40 million a year. That's the figure that we're talking about here. You mentioned some assumptions. Can we see those assumptions? Are we allowed to see those assumptions? Can we be given a copy of those assumptions so we can see where we're getting them from? Because people keep throwing MOD as one of those major assumptions, but they're not putting in the mitigating factors of the various different pension schemes of the armed forces. So is there any way we can get a hold of those assumptions?
Well, Doug, I'll need obviously to clear with ministers the making available the detail of those. However, I can talk you through what some of those main assumptions are, because there are a number of key things that come into play. I mentioned before there are issues about, well, just how many people are there out there in the various categories. In terms of those who are severely physically disabled, permanently disabled, we're reasonably clear about the numbers, because most of them are already receiving services from the Victims and Survivors Service. Big unknown is the psychological injuries, and that's what is a significant change to what was originally in the Stormont House Agreement now. And so trying to work out how many people there are who have a qualifying psychological injuries is extremely difficult. There's no clear picture there. Now, we have worked with Kieran Mulholland, who's a consultant psychiatrist at Queen's, who's done work in this area, and he's worked from population studies of how many people have presenting with mental illness and tried to work that down to those that would be permanent and those that would have arisen from the Troubles. And he has given us the range of figures that we have got, somewhere between 3,500 and 7,000. Now, the issue then is, well, how many of those will actually come forward? And when they come forward, how many of them will qualify? And one of the other key things about this scheme, which again is a change in the final scheme, is a degree of disablement that is required, the threshold that's required to receive a payment. I mean, the original advice from the Commissioner was, way back in 2014, was that the level should be set somewhere around 40% disablement. That then changed when there was later advice given, and said, well, it could be lower, and victims groups wanted it to be lower. And in the final decisions taken by the Secretary of State, the lower threshold is 14%. So there could be significant numbers of people will come in with a potential permanent disablement of a psychological type of 14%. And that's a significant driver here in the cost, the sheer number of people that could come forward in that way. You mentioned the thing about army pensions. The issue there is that while it's unlikely those that have served in the services would qualify themselves because they're already receiving other pensions, and it's likely to exceed what is available. But the point is that the provisions for passing this on for 10 years to your dependents or to your spouse or to a carer are more generous than the other provisions, and that's where the eligibility comes in for the service personnel and for the police. That it's that passing on of the entitlement. So if they sign up in their own right and qualify, they themselves won't receive any funding. But when they die, they can pass on 10 years entitlement to their dependents, and that's where that issue comes in. So the numbers that are there, we spoke to the MOD, we couldn't get any figures that made any sense that would have enabled us to make an assessment on that basis, and we had to look at other sources of doing that. So what we did there actually was we looked at, we knew how many service personnel have been killed during the Troubles, or we had reasonable figures around that, and we said, well, is there any ratio between those that are killed and those that are injured? And we applied the same sort of ratio that we knew was present for civilian deaths to civilian injuries, and we applied that to the service personnel. And we used a couple of different assumptions around that, but that gave us some sense of how many service personnel might be eligible. So there's an example of some of the assumptions that are in there. The other one that's important is how many people will take a lump sum of 10 years payments up front rather than take the lifetime payment. And that makes a big difference. So we modeled a couple of different assumptions around that, and it's hard to know. We went for a high one, a medium, and a low one, and our central estimate is based on the sort of middle estimate there, and that can make a difference of over the lifetime of the scheme, which is up to 80 years. Now, the payments were very low in the last lot of years, but it could be as long as that. It can make a difference of £300 or £400 million, depending how many opt for that, as opposed to pension. So that gives you a sense. It's partly about the numbers. It's partly about how many come forward. It's partly about the level of awards that are made, but it's also about the choices that are open to people and that they can make within the scheme. And we won't know until people start to make those choices what sort of pattern is going to emerge from that. So I hope that's given you a bit of a flavour, Doug, of the sort of things we've had to deal with.
It does, Mark, and you know what? I'd really love to see those assumptions laid out. I really would, and I hope you can get us some, because I think it's really important. Because I mean, picking up on two of the things that you said, I mean, the psychological injuries. You're right. By dropping it down to 15%, it looks like you've just opened it really, really wide. But the issue is still in the title of the scheme, and that is a Troubles Permanent Disablement Scheme. So 15% doesn't sit on its own. It's 15% that is a permanent disablement. So it probably narrows it down far more than people realise. And the second thing is, and I'm sure I raised this before, and I need to go back and check my facts on this, Mark, but the MOD pension schemes are all life schemes. So they get passed on to the spouse for whole life, not 10 years, for a whole life. So I wouldn't mind just engaging with that a little further. That's why I'm asking for the assumptions, just so I can better understand them, because it is such a vast amount of money that we're talking about here. And because we're talking about it in that higher range, I guess there's a fear in every department that we're saying this is such a huge amount of money, nobody wants to pay for it. And that's not good for anybody. But I accept what you've said, Mark, and I'll leave that up there if I can. But can I just ask one other question, just in regards to the funding for the Office of Identity Cultural Expression? Do you have how much has been set aside for the creation of that, and specifically for the creation of the two important parts of that? That's the Irish Language Act and the Ulster Scots thingy-majigger.
Well, the current position on that, sorry, Doug, just to finish your previous point, the permanent point is absolutely critical in victims' payments, and that message has to be got out. That's why we are referring it to as the victims' payments permanent disablement scheme, because we need to get that point across to pay people. And we did follow up when you raised the issue about the pensions last time, and we've checked and we've confirmed that our assumptions are correct. But no, we're happy to look at that again, just in case there's anything that we've missed. In terms of the Office of Identity and Cultural Expression, there's not likely to be significant spend in this coming year, because there needs to be legislation brought through, and it will take at least a year to get the legislation through, because while the bills were appended to NDNA, they need to be finalised and then need to be brought through the various stages within the Assembly. So the reality is that after that legislation, if that legislation comes through quickly, there's going to be a period of time then for actually setting up the office. So the reality is there's not really going to be any expenditure, or very little expenditure on those offices over the next year, because it's going to take that time to get the legislation through and get all the appointments made and get the thing set up.
So we're really talking about the following year and in the next mandate in many ways. Is that fair?
It does depend on when how quickly the legislation goes through, but there's going to be a period after that, Doug, before you can actually make appointments and actually set the office up. So it has to be, there's a logical sequence there, so it's going to take that time.
Good man. Mark, thank you, and good luck with your new job.
Okay, thanks very much, Doug.
Okay, thank you, Doug. And if we could ask now for Pat Sheehan to be brought up into the spotlight. And while Pat's coming up, if I could just encourage any other members that do want to speak, if they want to use the raise hand function, just so that I can see that they're ready to ask a question. And in that, we'll pass over then to Pat.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Mark. And can I offer my best wishes to you as well in your new role? We'll probably be bumping into each other at some time.
Yes, I gathered that.
So just sticking for a minute with the victims' payment stuff, and what would the funding implications be in the first 3 to 4 years if people decided to take lump sums? Have you any idea on that?
I think you're still on mute there, Mark, maybe.
Sorry, I apologise for that. I keep forgetting about that. Part of the scheme, Pat, is that in order to get backdating to the Stormont House Agreement, you have to apply within the first 3 years. That's what's set out in the regulations. So we do expect, therefore, that people will apply quickly in those first 3 years. Given that if they apply early and they therefore qualify for the backdating, and if there are significant numbers who decide to go for a lump sum, it is likely that a significant proportion of the costs will occur in the first period. Now, whether it's the first 3 years, because it's not likely to be exactly the first 3 years, because it'll take some time for the applications to work their way through the panel and for determinations to be made. So it could stretch over slightly longer than the first 3 years, but there will be significant costs up front, and then we expect that to drop down to a much lower and consistent level over for the rest of the scheme. In terms of the costs broadly around that, talking in the matter of several £100 million.
That's very significant, and given that the British government thus far hasn't committed to funding this scheme to any extent at all that would have to be taken out of the block grant over the next 2 or 3 years, presumably.
Well, certainly the current position is that it will have to be paid from the block grant, and the issue is whether or not any additional funding comes from the Treasury into the block grant to allow for that. But one way or another, it will come out of the block grant. That's because the Executive Office has to pay it. It's a legal entitlement to victims, so that's where it has to come from. The issue is whether there's any funding coming from the Treasury to help to meet the costs.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm just thinking, I suppose I'm just thinking off the top of my head, I mean, it'll be disastrous for the finances here. I mean, you can think of how much is going to be stripped out of the health budget, the education budget, and so on, if the Treasury doesn't pony up.
Well, obviously, it has implications if the block grant isn't any larger and there's a legal entitlement, then that has quite obvious implications, and that's been part of the discussions that ministers have been having with the Secretary of State recently, and which are continuing. Okay.
Well, we'll see how those discussions develop. I wanted to go on to, since we're talking about funding being cut or not being available, the good relations funding is going to create serious problems for a number of the Executive Office projects, not least TBUC. What other programmes are going to be affected? Will any of the other ALBs be affected? Will there be job losses if that funding isn't restored?
Well, there's £12 million of good relations funding, which covers a range of actions across a range of departments. It's not all the Executive Office. There are 7 headline actions, and 5 of those are taken forward by other departments, and 2 of them are taken forward by the Executive Office, and that's the Urban Villages Scheme and the TBUC camps. Then there's other funding that comes out of that 12 million to support the Central Good Relations Fund, which is the fund that all the various groups apply to support their good relations projects. So it has a significant effect there. There are also implications for staffing in the department, because a significant number of staff in that area in the department are funded out of that 12 million programme. We have some baseline that we have staff funded out of, but we also have staff funded out of the particular programmes that they're helping to deliver. So there would be implications there for staff in the department. And obviously, if the schemes don't run, when there are other agencies who are delivering the schemes for us, for example, TBUC camps are delivered by the Education Authority on our behalf. So it would have implications then for the staff in the Education Authority who would be delivering those kinds of programmes. So there would be significant implications, both in terms of the activity that we're taking forward, the fact that this is a flagship programme for the Executive Office, and there would be implications for staffing. And that's why First and Deputy First have been making representations to the Finance Minister, and I think are hoping to meet him shortly, just to discuss the implications, Pat, with him.
Okay, so the implications aren't good, and in your own opinion, do you think is there any expectation that this funding will be replaced?
Well, that's very hard for me to say, Pat. But all I can say is that the First and Deputy First have made clear their commitment to the TBOC programme and to the Good Relations programme. They have already written to the Finance Minister setting out their concerns around this and the importance of this continuing, and I would expect that to be pressed very strongly in any meeting that they would have.
Okay, thanks for that. And just finally, one final question. In terms of an EQIA of the budget, my understanding is there wasn't one carried out. Is that right?
Well, what we have done is an initial equality screening to identify where the potential implications are, and we're still finalising that. I think where we get a clearer idea of the need for an equality impact assessment is when decisions are made about actual allocations, and things like the point you've just identified, Pat, whether or not that income stream for shared future funding is there or isn't, would be an important part of that assessment.
So there's still the potential for an EQIA to be carried out?
We're still working on that, yes. We're still in discussion with ministers on that, yeah.
Okay, thanks for that. Thanks, Mark. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Pat. Thank you, Mark. I see you already looking at the budget implications for EA in that answer there. I see you getting warmed up.
You noticed that?
I sense that. But as it's youth service, I'll certainly back up 100% everything that there is in ensuring that funding continues. Okay, look, if we could ask next for Trevor Lum to come up into the spotlight, and we'll get Trevor to ask us questions, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And Mark, congratulations from the independent sector as well. It's good to see you going to education, my old committee, which I was very fond of. I'm trying to go back to victims' pensions. I'm sure you are too. But considering the impasse that there is between the Executive and the Secretary of State, and the fact that we've had now a Supreme Court ruling that the Executive has to pay for this money, which they don't have, and given what you said about upfront payments in the first 2 or 3 years, it just seems to be an impossible situation. Is there any further that this whole process has to go in legal terms, or is that judgment that was handed down the end of it, do you think?
Well, the initial judgment made clear that there was a legal entitlement and that the Executive Office would have to meet that. And the Executive Office obviously have to meet it out of his budget on behalf of the Executive. The Executive Office itself couldn't possibly meet the payments that are required. But the legal entitlement is there. And both First and Deputy First Minister and indeed the Secretary of State have made it clear that victims will receive their payments. And that flows from that initial judgment. There is a further hearing that will take place early in March. The judge had given time for some discussion to be had around the whole funding issue, and the JR has been taken around the certainty of funding. So, if that would be the next legal stage where the judge has indicated that he would join the Department of Finance at the next stage. If the funding issue hadn't been agreed, and it'll be up to the judge to decide what he determines at that point, Trevor. But clearly it's difficult. It's a difficult issue.
It's certainly that okay, but it's not getting any closer to solution. That's what worries me. I mean, if this goes back to the judge in a week or two now, he'll be expecting solutions, or not proposals, and there is no solution here. The Stormont Executive doesn't have the money to come up with, let's say, £300 million to cover the cost of this scheme in the first couple of years. British government is absolutely adamant that they're not going to fund it. So it's hard to see how they would suddenly magically improve or increase the amount of the block grant to cover it when they've actually said they won't. I don't see how they can disguise it in any way. They either have to pony up, as Pat said, or else you really have a very serious legal impasse. And I wonder who's the winner in terms of a dispute between two governments and the Supreme Court.
Well, I think it's a High Court, Trevor, rather than the Supreme Court. But there has been that meeting with the Secretary of State, that initial meeting. There's going to be a further. My understanding is that there will be further meetings. There've been some additional work has been asked for, so there is a process ongoing. Our ministers are engaged with the Secretary of State, so there is a process ongoing, and we'll have to see what actually comes out of that. But you're right, it's a pressing issue, and I think First and Deputy First Minister have indicated just how important an issue it is for them. But they have emphasised, in line with the judgment, that victims will receive their payments. But clearly, whatever comes out of the negotiations is going to have implications one way or another.
Yeah, so I don't. I'm finished really, Chair, but I don't see much comfort for the victims in any of this. It's a standstill and a standoff. But anyway, we'll see where it goes. Thanks, Mark, and good luck in your new position.
Thanks, Trevor.
You're getting out just in time.
Okay, Trevor, careful. Okay, thank you very much for that, Trevor. Okay, if we could next bring Martina Anderson up into the spotlight, and maybe, Martina, just before you start, maybe I should have said it under Chairman's remarks, but just to set the stage, I saw media reports that you were subjected to an awful lot of vile abuse online, and I just wanted, on behalf of the committee, to say that we were all, I'm sure, in solidarity with that. Politicians should not have to tolerate abuse when they're going about their public duties. And I know that yesterday there were several political offices, including Nicola Mallon's, that were targeted. And just to call that out and say that it's not acceptable, and just maybe to extend yourself our best wishes on being on the receipt of that. So, but I'll pass you over for your questions now.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for that solidarity. And obviously we would all send the same to Nicola and others. No one in public life or any other form of life should have to face or put up with this, and it is right to call it out. I want to say to Mark that not having a paper in front of us, it's going to be a very hard act for someone to follow, to be able to present as you did today, and what you've always been able to do at times when we haven't had a paper, to at least to give us a picture of what we're facing. But I do concur with what the Chair and what Pat said about the need for us to have papers in front of us so that we can interrogate and do our role, our scrutinising role properly. I think it is time that the British government acted to pay for the pension scheme that it's created, so that victims don't have to face any further delay. A lot of the other members have asked the questions that I was looking answers for, so you were able to provide those. Can I take you back to some of the comments that you made? It was just picking up on what Pat was saying and others in relation to the TBOC scheme and the urban villages and all the other schemes. And you talked about the Shared Prosperity Fund. Now, whilst the Joint First Ministers are going to the Finance Minister, is it my understanding that this funding has not actually continued by the British government? That, for instance, in New Decade, New Approach, we were promised funding, and then we were promised shared prosperity funds to meet the EU gap that the funding gap that would be created by being dragged out of the EU. So is this funding, has the British government stopped the funding? Like you said, it ends next month. Have they not continued to pay for it, as the suggestion was that they would?
Michael, I think maybe we're getting mixed up between two things that sound very much the same. The Shared Prosperity Fund that you're talking about, but the funding I was talking about is Shared Future funding, which is different. Now, there are some similarities in one sense, in that the Shared Future funding was the product of the Fresh Start Agreement. So it was an agreement between the two governments, and it was of 60 million for 5 years, and that was the agreement that was being provided. It was provided as part of the agreement, and it was earmarked specifically for good relations. So that is what has come to an end. And we always knew it was coming to an end, and we have been flagging it. We've been flagging this for some time, that there needs to be a replacement stream of funding. So that's why our ministers are now pushing to make sure that replacement funding is provided.
I had thought, my understanding had been, in terms of the that shared future fund that you talk about, that there was an expectation the British government would maybe continue that in New Decade, New Approach. And then, as you say, separately to that, we have the Shared Prosperity Fund, where we were told we were going to get funding, and that hasn't come about. Given the uncertainty that we have at the moment, because, as you say, we don't know what is going to be funded yet, But I would like to just put on record, Chair, that we certainly would like to see a full equality impact assessment done of this budget for the TEO. So I know that some departments are dealing with what they call high-level impact assessments or high-level screening and being screened out. And I would just like to put down a marker that before any such decision was taken like that, Chair, that we as a committee had an opportunity to once again engage with whoever's going to replace you, Mark. And hopefully, Mark, by that stage, we'll have papers in front of us that we can actually read and understand, as opposed to having to jot down all the figures as you're shouting them out. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Martina.
Okay, thank you very much, Martina. I think that's the last question, last person that's indicated to speak, Mark. So you're more or less off the hook at this stage.
Chair, to ask a question. Could Chris Telford want a question?
Okay, he hasn't indicated, but that's perfectly fine. Come on ahead, Christopher, if you want to come up into the spotlight to ask a question. I
messaged you and was waving furiously at you. I'm still feeling on the bad side. I tell you what, I wanted to ask about. You will have seen the comments today. I think it was from the Secretary of State in relation to the victims' funding. It is clear from what he is saying that the NIO seem pretty immovable on this subject. I wonder, could you just speak to that and indicate? I know obviously there may be discussions still ongoing, but I mean, I do think it is, frankly, a ridiculous position that the Secretary of State has adopted in terms of the approach that he has taken. You know, devising a scheme and then refusing to fund it. Devising a scheme when we were in a period of direct rule and then refusing to put the funding for it on the table. I'm just wondering, could you provide an update, Mark, just where those discussions are at? Because I am mindful of the fact that they have been going on for quite some time now. And if he's talking to the media, basically saying that the Finance Minister's position is untenable in terms of funding for this, it doesn't indicate that the discussions are going particularly well.
Thanks, Christopher, for that. Well, the first thing is the discussions are still ongoing. I think I made the point before that the responsibility of determining costs and looking at putting up a business case rests with the body that is bringing forward the proposals. And in this case, it was the NIO and it was the Secretary of State. And in bringing those, our minister's case is that in bringing those forward, while there were elements of that obviously local parties would have supported, there were significant departures or significant decisions that were made by the Secretary of State, which in turn have implications for costs. The difficulty was that those weren't really bottomed out when the policy was being determined because a full business case wasn't done. So the reality is that this legislation was made without full awareness of what the potential implications of the costs were. Then when this point was made clear during the process to NIO that a business case ought to have been prepared. There were some high-level costings prepared, but it wasn't a business case and it didn't go into the level of detail it should have. So when this came across for implementation, the legal duty on TEO, our first job was to try and work out, well, how much is this actually going to cost? Who's eligible? And I explained some of the stuff that we have gone through. Now, I think part of the reason why there hasn't been more detailed engagement with the SOS earlier, I mean, our ministers have been seeking for a meeting. The Secretary of State have been asking about the costs. Well, we've been working to try and get the costs. We would have expected to have come with the policy, but we've been working on the way I described to pull the information together to cost as best we can, and that has then formed the basis of that initial discussion that there was with the Secretary of State yesterday. So again, there's been some further analysis has been asked for, so the process is still in play, and we'll have to see just how that plays itself out.
I mean, there are elements of it. You're absolutely right. There are elements of it that I do welcome and think that are an improvement, but I think it's offhand and aloof to seek to give us a new policy framework during a period of direct rule without the relevant funding to deliver that. And I understand, the thinking at Westminster may well have been, while we were in the period of direct rule, to use the occasion to break the logjam, just like they used the occasion to impose different policy frameworks on us, some of which I really, really don't agree with. But I think if it's going to incur cost, then, as you say, the people that are devising the policy are going to have to stump up for it. And I think his comments today were very discouraging in that regard. So when do you think that these discussions, and Trevor Lunn's right, you're getting off the Department of Education right about the right time, but when do you think these discussions will be brought in for a landing and brought in for a conclusion?
Well, Christopher, I'm not sure I can give you any sort of definitive answer on that. That's really going to depend on the parties involved. All I can say is that there were these initial discussions, which is encouraging. There's been some work asked for, and officials are engaging on that, and we'll make that available as soon as possible. So that should pave the way for any further discussions. And there is, of course, in the background, there is the judgment of the next stage of the judicial review, which is due in early March. So there is a pressure here for decisions to be taken.
Okay, that's good. Thanks, Mark. Thank you, and good luck in your new role.
Thanks very much, Christopher. And I'm sure there will be problems in DA I'm not yet aware of, so I don't think I'm escaping.
Oh, I'd say you're well aware of what the problems are and that lie ahead of you. I'm sure they're manifold. Look, one quick final question, Mark, was something that I wanted to cover. I just note from the departmental budgets that there is a considerable amount of spend for during March. I think it's listed at like 22 million of resource and 35 capital. Is that something that you're going to be able to deliver on, or is that a planning? Is that the way things are laid out so that then it carries over into the next year, or is that stuff that's been handed back in January monitoring already? But where are we with those figures?
Well, I'd make some general comments, and I don't know if either of my colleagues want to come in on the specifics. But every year we try and work to ensure we have a more even pattern of spend, and no matter how we do that, and particularly with capital projects, it seems to be that you always end up that a lot of completion of capital projects, whether it's purchase of sites or whether it's various forms of expenditure, tend to be concentrated in the last quarter. I don't know whether it's the deadline of end year that focuses minds or what the reason is. But we can't carry this money over. We don't have that sort of flexibility to carry over. That's why there's always that rush to try and make sure that any money that we retain at that point is spent. Because we have the opportunity, obviously, during monitoring rounds before that, if we think we can't spend, and we always profile it to release that funding. So I am aware, certainly on the capital side, that we have a number of projects, for example, on the urban villages side, that we're hoping to make significant progress on in the next matter of weeks, and that will account for some of that spend. I'm not sure so much about the resource spend. I'm not sure if Nelia has sound or not, but whether Nelia or Tara have any perspectives that they can help with on this. So, Tara, have you anything to say, or Nelia anything to sign out to us? Is that, I think?
I would agree with Mark there around the capital side. With the revenue side now, I'd need to look into that and maybe get back to you on that one.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Thanks. Okay, look, folks, thank you very much indeed for coming up. Apologies for whatever has been the technical problems and gremlins that have got in there, but we got round them in the end. I wish you as well, and thank you, Mark, and wish you all the best in the role in education, where no doubt I will be equally as in contact with you via there as other places, but we wish you all the best in that. Thank you very much, everybody.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, bye. Thank you. Okay, members, I've set the wrong bit of paper down. We'll give a little moment just to re-profile the spotlight where we can get Declan Kearney and Gary Middleton up into there. Maybe just to take the opportunity for members just to explain from my screen, the little bit along the top where you send messages actually fades away after a few seconds. And it's only when you move the mouse that you see it. So that's why I really need people to use the raise hand symbol, because also when you're in the audience, I can't see you. So you can only be seen whenever you're actually in the spotlight. So
in the spotlight. If Christopher Stelford in the spotlight.
You're there, Gary, just in case you say anything and mention it, like I'm up in front of that whatever committee.
Yeah, I can see Declan, I can see Christopher, so I'm saying yeah.
Yep. Perfect. So, but for as I say, for members, if they want to speak, if they use the raise hand function, then I can see them down the side that they've raised their hands and can call them in. I think is Minister Kearney with us by phone, maybe, is he, or is he there by screen?
No, Colin, I'm here.
You're there.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but we can't see you.
Let me see if I'm doing something wrong here. I can see yourselves. I'm
becoming an expert in call handling and assisting with technical problems. There could be a possibility that your camera is located the wrong way around and maybe looking out the back of or is there something covering your camera?
I don't think so, Colin. Let me see.
We have a perfect sound of you, Declan, so we might continue because we can hear you perfectly. So
let me see. No, that's the camera off now, Colin.
Yeah.
I'll put a call into an official here. They normally work the magic for me, but as long as you've got audio, let me try and fix the video.
Okay, that's great. Definitely, I'm going to start taking bets on the fact that we'll get through a presentation here without a technical problem, but we'll get this one sorted out. But look, members, we'll move on to item 6, which is the Brexit oral evidence session with the junior ministers. In pages 120 to 189 of the meeting pack are the relevant papers, as well as pages 6 to 62 of the tabled pack today. If I can take the opportunity to welcome Ministers Middleton and Kearney along today, and also just to welcome Gary into his new role, where he's been for a number of weeks now and up in front of ourselves for the first time. We wish you well in that. It's certainly not a quiet job or a job that doesn't have its priorities, but we certainly wish you all the very best with that as you're going forward. And maybe if I can pass over to yourselves, if you want to give us a short presentation, and then we'll open up the floor for questions then.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thanks, Colin. Thanks to colleagues for having us this afternoon. I'll offer some remarks, Colin, and then I'm going to try and see if I can get the video fixed, but I'll proceed for now. So thanks again for having us along at committee. We welcome the opportunity to provide yourselves with a further update on EU exit matters. Colin, I want to say this at the outset. I understand that the committee has yet to receive information that I had hoped would be forthcoming from since our last hearing. I've spoken with officials on 2 or 3 occasions about this, and I would hope to have this addressed as soon as possible. Since we last spoke to the committee, there have been a number of significant developments, not least of which, of course, the appointment of Gary as junior minister in replacement of Gordon. As set out in the previous briefing to the committee, with agreement reached on the trade and cooperation agreement and key decisions on the protocol in December, the focus of our work since has been very much on operational readiness. And there are different views, of course, on the protocol and on the trade and cooperation agreement itself. However, the decisions reached did provide some certainty for businesses needed to prepare for the end of the transition period. However, while it provided some certainty, it left very little time to raise awareness and build understanding of the new requirements in moving goods or for businesses to fully prepare. So it has been challenging for businesses and communities in adapting. It's important that we recognise that and the outworking of the initial disruption following the end of the transition period. Reflecting on that, focus has continued to be on operational readiness, working with businesses and officials in Dublin and Whitehall to identify and address issues, whether systemic or specific to individual traders, to better integrate systems and to engage businesses to raise awareness and compliance. This ongoing work has had a positive impact through the development of solutions in areas such as groupage, which I spoke about in our last hearing, which Gary is going to address in his remarks, but also in the building of relations and practical cooperation between our own officials and those in Dublin and London has been particularly important in addressing the issue of business readiness. As we highlighted in January, much of the disruption experienced at the end of the transition period was associated with a lack of preparedness on the part of British-based businesses moving goods into the north. That led to some disruption in the movement of goods from Britain, with significant delays for businesses seeking to move goods through Dublin Port in particular. Anecdotally, we had reports of higher volumes of empty lorries returning from Britain as businesses remained uncertain as to the new requirements which delayed movements. As part of the wider work to address that and raise awareness and compliance, the Trader Support Service has continued to deliver a number of webinars and to reach out proactively to businesses. And importantly, those seminars have included officials from Irish Revenue Commissioners and the Department of Agricultural, Food and the Marine. I understand the feedback from businesses on this has been very positive. In addition to demonstrating a joint commitment to the importance of East-West trade, it has allowed traders to understand the requirements at every stage of the journey in moving goods between Britain and the North. As we've heard from the sector, if businesses are to be prepared, then there needs to be clarity and support to work through challenges as they emerge. The focus on operational readiness and engaging directly with business to address issues has clearly had a positive impact. By way of example, volumes through our ports have returned to levels comparable with the same period last year, and there are lower levels of turnbacks on the Holyhead-Dublin route. For instance, freight flow from Britain to the north on the 16th of February was 1% higher than the same day last year, and 2% lower compared to the same day the previous week. In addition, there's been an overall decrease in the average number of HGVs arriving without the requisite paperwork at Holyhead, from a high of almost 12% back in January. That's not to say there are not continued issues and challenges. There clearly are. I set out the examples of steel and parcels during our last session, and of course, the ending of the various grace periods will also present particular challenges in the coming months. And we're in a process of change, and further challenges are going to emerge. A key point, though, is that the collaborative approach with colleagues in Dublin and Whitehall, focused on finding solutions, has proved important to date in resolving the challenges and beginning to create the space to look at the opportunities which the protocol presents. That's an important point, because whilst there are different views on EU exit and the protocol itself, we are committed to working together to achieve the best possible outcome for our businesses and citizens. And that requires us to focus not only on addressing the challenges, but also, importantly, exploiting the opportunities. In order to do this effectively, it will be essential that we are represented appropriately in the governance structure of both the withdrawal agreement and the trade and cooperation agreement. And we will continue to emphasise this during ministerial engagements. Our officials are also engaging with the British Cabinet Office as these new structures are developed to ensure that our interests are represented, particularly where there is a clear intersect between the operations of the protocol and the trade and cooperation agreement. As well as ensuring effective governance, it is also essential that we are legislatively on a firm foundation, not only now, but also in the coming months and years, to ensure that we can in fact secure the best outcome for people here. The First Minister and the Deputy First Minister are currently considering 25 common frameworks that have received provisional confirmation from the respective JMC. And at that point, Colin, I'll conclude and hand over to Gary to make his remarks. Thank you.
Thanks, Declan. And first of all, can I thank the Chair for his very kind and warm welcome. Obviously, it's a delight to be here in front of the committee today. And I know that the committee has been grappling with a number of issues. And as you can see, the Executive Office is a very wide and extensive department, and obviously, as I say, I'm trying to get across all of that detail, and things have been going very well so far. I want to thank the committee for the work that they do with ourselves as ministers, and as Junior Minister Kearney has already indicated, there are differing views among the parties and the executive in respect of the protocol, but also in terms of the trade and cooperation agreement as well. But we are committed to working together to try and get the best outcome for our citizens and for our businesses as well. Declan has set out the context, so I'd like to now just provide you with some more of the detail on the operational issues that we continue to face and that we continue to deal with, as well as just an overview as to where we are at present and what further challenges we expect to see in the coming days. As you will have heard, some of the main issues that we have faced since the end of the transition period include the lack of readiness of GB businesses and also the issue of groupage as well. First of all, on groupage, this is an issue that Minister Kearney and my predecessor, Junior Minister Lyons, had raised with the UK government on several occasions in January. It's something that has been raised on several occasions since that as well. We were pleased to see DEFRA publish additional and new guidance on groupage, which they developed working alongside both our local department of DERA here, along with industry representatives as well. So we are grateful to DERA for their work on this so far, and especially to the industry representatives. It's important that we hear from those industry representatives, and they were able to share with us their expertise and took part in the trials that were held to test and, of course, to refine the guidance as well. So trials continue to happen. Trials are continuing to ensure that any further issues are picked up and guidance will be updated as and when is necessary. We do understand that DEFRA are also preparing similar trials with the Republic of Ireland to ensure that the new processes work for goods which are transited through ports there. So we hope that that will be helpful to our businesses. Another significant issue for us in January was the lack of preparedness among businesses in GB. That preparedness was around the new requirements and what that would mean for them. So a lot of work has since gone on in trying to improve that and improve the readiness of GB businesses to trade with us here in Northern Ireland. The executive ministers have raised this issue on a regular basis with the UK government, and we appreciate that the extensive and intensive programme of engagement that they have put in place to try and ensure that their businesses are as best prepared as they can be. Our officials have been involved as well in the UK government senior officials business readiness group, which gets regular updates and discusses targeted communications from across Whitehall, including from HMRC, DEFRA, the Department for Transport, and of course the Border and Protocol Delivery Group within the Cabinet Office. So at a ministerial level, we are continuing to attend the XO committee meetings on a regular basis, and we take every opportunity that we can as ministers to raise the issues within that committee. We're also involved in the government's Brexit Business Task Force, which brings together businesses, officials, along with ministers, trade associations, and our officials. And we have regular meetings with the Trader Support Service as well. As Junior Minister Kearney has said, the Trader Support Service are continuing to engage with businesses, and figures do show that the number of businesses registered with the service has increased while the number of open cases is falling. So that is encouraging to see. The increased uptake shows that markets' confidence in the service, and the decrease in the number of open cases shows that some issues are being resolved and traders are getting more used to the new requirements. We continue to encourage any business who might benefit from the services offered by the TSS to register with them, and we would be grateful for the assistance of members on this committee to get that information out there and ensure that businesses do avail of the support as and when they would require it. Where there has been some good news in terms of the resolution of some issues and the decrease in cases being raised, we are very aware that there are further significant challenges coming down the line, and we are continuing to focus on doing everything we can to help our businesses continue to operate in the new environment. Businesses have articulated serious concerns about the impact of further charges, the difficulties that will mean, of course, for businesses and local consumers as well. For example, the committee may be aware that from Monday of this week, the 22nd of February, official certification has applied in relation to movements of fresh meat, mincemeat and meat preparations from GB to NI. So we will be assessing that. Obviously, it's very early days at this minute in time, but we will be assessing the impact of that and what it has had on the supply of those products to our businesses here in Northern Ireland. This requirement will, of course, apply until the end of the grace period in relation to the so-called prohibitions and restrictions, P&R, on the 30th of June 2021, unless, and of course, an alternative can be agreed. Given the new application of certification of these products and the upcoming end of the grace period for supermarkets and their suppliers on the 31st of March, we are concerned that the official control system might be overwhelmed and there might not be sufficient veterinary capacity to provide the increased number of EHC certificates that will be required. Given the potential impact that this could have on the choice and the cost of food here, and we intend to continue to raise this issue with the UK Government. The committee will be aware that discussions are ongoing between the UK Government and the EU in relation to grace periods, not just for P&R goods, but also in terms of supermarkets, the impact on parcels and medicines as well. These discussions are also considering pet travel and solutions to enable goods to move tariff-free in line with product-specific quotas. You will also be aware that the EU Commission Vice President Maros Sefcovic met with business leaders and members of civic society very recently and heard firsthand some of the challenges that they were facing. So just in closing of my remarks initially, the First and Deputy First Ministers are attending the meeting of the Joint Committee this afternoon, as we speak in fact, and we await the outcome of that and the outcome of those discussions with great interest. And of course we will stand ready as always to do what we can to help our businesses and our citizens as well. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Minister. And I see that Minister Kearney is back with us. We can see him. He did gallant efforts there during that your part of the presentation to get the camera available. So I'll maybe kick off with a couple of questions and then I have a few members that are lined up as well. So maybe just to go back to something that you said there, Declan, at the very end, because it has been raised in the Welsh Assembly and also in the House of Lords. And so therefore it is a matter of public record that there is a delay in developing the 26 common frameworks as part of the Brexit process. And the suggestion is that the delay is being caused by the Executive Office. So could you explain to us where those common frameworks currently are and what the hold-up is if they have been passed everywhere else and they're waiting to make their way down the structure of the Assembly to be assessed and what that delay is?
Yes, Colin, I'm happy to come in on that particular point. If you just bear with me, I want to give some specific details for you. Am I still up on camera there, Colin? Because I found myself drifting in and out and actually wasn't sure whether I was
that's perfect
or not. So the position in relation to the common frameworks is that following the approval by relevant portfolio ministers, the two joint ministers were asked to confirm 25 frameworks. And you correctly point out, as indicated, I think, in my remarks, that they've been provisionally confirmed by the respective JMC ministers. Further advice was provided to ministers on the implications and risks associated with the lack of executive provisional agreement of the common frameworks on the 8th of February. So to ensure operability of the frameworks, there actually is a hazard now that the British, the Scottish, the Welsh governments would pursue British, if you will, only frameworks rather than taking a for administration approach. And the hazard flowing from that is that that would then disarm our officials' abilities to exercise influence on behalf of the executive. So this is an issue, Colin, in light of the discussions in other administrations and the fact that it has been addressed, for example, by the Senate. It needs to be moved through to conclusion as quickly as possible. I have raised this with officials, but I regret that I'm not in a position to provide any further detail in respect of progress at today's hearing for you. It is an issue that has been discussed by myself on a number of occasions where we're at on frameworks. The latest occasion was Monday past. So what I can assure the committee is that I will be doing everything within my influence and ability to ensure that these issues are brought to a conclusion and that we actually do in fact get ourselves into a more sustainable position in relation to the common frameworks.
Okay. I appreciate what you're saying there in terms of that there isn't the progress that you would like to see in the issue of the common frameworks. Maybe I got lost a wee bit in the detail as to what is it that's actually causing the problem. Is what you're saying that, I mean, I read the frameworks as being something that is overarching to all, to England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, and that they're just approved in each. Is what you're saying that actually there may be an opportunity that a framework may be delivered in one side differently in GB from Northern Ireland, and that there could be problems because of that?
Well, you would not have for administration coordination is the point that I'm making. And unless we move ahead at pace to close those issues out, then that hazard does arise, that we lose influence on the one hand on the part of officials, and secondly, that we would not have a coordinated for administration approach towards the common frameworks. And clearly that would not be an advantageous situation for us to find ourselves in. So
is that basically saying, I'm trying to drill it down just this, we disagree with some of the frameworks and we want to sort them out? Where it's at? No, they have not moved through the executive office and been signed off at this particular point in time, Colin. Okay. Clearly maximum operability of common frameworks is in everyone's interests. Sure. Okay. Gary, you happy enough? There anything to add to that?
Nothing to add other than they are under consideration, and I think that Declan has articulated the position where if the other nations within the UK were to move ahead, it would put us in a situation where would be at a disadvantage, even in terms of feeding in some of the issues. We do need to get that over the line, but as I say, we will feed back to you as and when we do get confirmation that we can move forward.
Okay, thank you. Minister Gove wrote to Mr. Zakovic about a few weeks ago and stated that he wanted to see some flexibilities in the protocol to make it work. And he said that he was working on a list with the executive here in terms of those flexibilities. Could we get a copy of those flexibilities that have been proposed? And has there been any progress on the delivery of those flexibilities?
Shall I go first?
Either go ahead, Declan. You're fine. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, he did. He did write, Colin, and the issues raised in Michael Gove's letter are on the public record, so I don't see any difficulty. And I presume there is no difficulty in sharing additional information on those matters with the committee at all. You'll be familiar with the chronology from the submission of his letter. There were meetings subsequent to all of that, and I think it's fair to say that Maros Šefčovič has made it clear that the European Commission is willing to look at pragmatic solutions to any difficulties that arise, but they see the address of these issues in terms of this being a two-way street, So they have made the point, and again, this is a matter of public record, that they do not feel that the British government at this point in time has maximised all of the flexibilities available to it within the agreement and the protocol at this particular point in time. So in the context of a two-way street approach to addressing issues of disruption, I do think that the European Commission are open to that discussion. The Joint Committee is meeting today. The Specialised Committee met yesterday. I'm aware that the Specialised Committee touched on a number of the flexibilities that were indicated in Michael Gove's correspondence. No conclusion was arrived at in the Specialised Committee on those matters, but I'm sure that they will be focused on and addressed again today in the Joint Committee meeting. If you're to ask me, do I think that the various parties to the negotiation with responsibility for implementation of both the withdrawal agreement and the protocol are in solution finding mode, then yes, I do think that we have a situation now where the British government has pivoted since we last met. In fact, I suggested the British government how the protocol could be smoothly operated. I think that you also have within the European Commission an appreciation that we have experienced difficulties in the course of the last few weeks, but that these are not insurmountable. And both Michael Gove and Maroš Šefčovič in the joint communique that was issued, and I think that was on the 3rd of February, committed both the British government and the European Commission to working together closely to ensure proper implementation of the protocol, to ensure that the interests of all of our citizens were best met. And I actually met with Michael Gove on the following day, and I said that I thought that the tone of the communique was correct and set the right acoustics in place for the follow-up engagement between the two delegations from the British government and the European Commission that followed in the following week, the subsequent week. So there's been a fair degree of engagement in the period since, both at delegation level. We now have a joint committee meeting today. I think that's the context, that's the space within which those issues now need to be addressed. But I do think that we will continue to hear that the resolution of those issues is very much to be found within the framework of the protocol, and on the basis that the two principal sides both need to be working together and making use of the various measures available to them. I hope that's useful.
Okay, thank you. Gary, do you want to add anything?
Well, yes, obviously you will have seen, no doubt, the list of issues which the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster had put into his letter, obviously, to Šefčovič. A number of them refer to obviously extending the grace periods, trying to find a permanent solution for P&R goods as well, extending temporary arrangements for parcels, medicines. The difficulty with that, and again, there's obviously not a common shared view on this, but we would feel that a temporary sticking plaster type approach to these issues isn't going to be sustainable in the long term. When we speak to businesses, the main concern that we would get from them is it's not even now in terms of clarity. It's a matter of change, and we have to recognise that there are difficulties here which are way beyond teething problems alone. I do welcome the engagement that's ongoing between the CDL and the EU as well. Obviously, there have been numerous engagements, many of which that myself and Junior Minister Kearney would have attended, and that is useful. But we do need to get to a point where there is a clear recognition of the real detrimental impact that the protocol is currently having on businesses here in Northern Ireland. And I think that until we get to that position or that recognition, I think it is going to be very difficult to move forward, and it's going to be very difficult to get out of the current economic position that we find ourselves in. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. I could comment that a temporary solution isn't meant to be a long-term solution, and in that sense that temporary is meant to be temporary until you find a permanent solution. But I take the other points that you made after that. I'm going to move on. Doug Beattie is up next. If we could bring Doug up into the spotlight. I know that Martina said that she had to go at 4 and it's 10 to 4, but I think she's fallen off. Do you want
to let Martina in first and she's got to go?
I think she has gone, actually. I'm looking down my list just to make sure, but I think she had just gone. She was there a second ago. So we'll pass over to yourself then, Doug.
All right, Chair, thank you. And welcome again, as always. And Gary, good to see you here, as ever. Very clear, very concise answers so far. Can I just ask, and maybe just get your thoughts on this? At this moment in time, about 15% of the point of entry certificates through the whole of the EU goes between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, yet we account for less than 1% of the trade. Is there an issue that the EU is applying, and this was the month of January, is there an issue that the EU is applying their rules and regulations stricter on that route between GB and Northern Ireland than they are in the rest of the United Kingdom, including into Dublin?
Well, Chair, I maybe come in on that first, and thanks, Doug, for your very kind remarks. What I would say in terms of your position in regards to the checks and the health entry documents, it does seem quite a ridiculous position from the EU in terms of their approach, but it's also highlighted the fact that it's a ridiculous position that the EU are actually demanding checks and declarations on EU goods produced in the EU but distributed from GB, which is a very, very strange position. But also in the fact that, and you've said in terms of the size of Northern Ireland, yet we're dealing with 16% of all health entry documents in comparison with the whole of the European Union. It has to be noted as well, which I find quite interesting in terms of the latest statistics we have seen, the number of pests, contaminants or diseases discovered by SPS checks at Northern Ireland ports is 0. And I think that we need to get to the position where we do be, when we talk about flexibility and we talk about, making Northern Ireland work, making the agreements work, then we need to be reasonable. And what we can't have is a situation where the internal market of the United Kingdom is disrupted so much to the point where it's effectively crippling our businesses, but creating a very detrimental situation, even when you compare that to other entry points right across the European Union.
Declan, did you want to have anything?
Yes,
I'll
just add a comment to that, Doug. Good to see you again. First of all, I don't have that statistic that you referenced to hand. I personally, anecdotally or otherwise, don't pick up any feedback to suggest that there's a disproportionate or an adverse or a punitive approach being taken by the European Commission in relation to the operation of those controls. I think that we, in terms of SPS, we will hear the European Commission say that SPS issues on our side can be avoided if the British government was in turn then properly respecting or observing European Union SPS rules. And I think this really brings us back to the nub of the smooth operation of the protocol. We're approximately or approaching 8 weeks in. There have been some difficulties with it thus far, some of which, and I indicated this at the last meeting, and I'm pleased to see that the trajectory seems to be positive still towards finding resolutions to some issues. Other issues which appear to have a partial resolution, and then some other issues, Doug, which have not been properly bottomed out. And it requires both the British government and the European Commission to be properly engaged within the framework of the protocol to ensure that, in fact, it does operate smoothly, that it's operating in a proportionate way, where there is a frictionless approach, or as frictionless as possible an approach towards trade east to west, west to east, on an all-island basis, and both between Dublin and southern ports with ports, their counterparts in Britain itself. Now, that needs to be our focus as an executive, and I think as a chamber, working unanimously to ensure that that happens. But the truth of it is that we now have, as a result of the protocol, new trading realities, and that's an inescapable consequence of Brexit. Our function and purpose has to be to mitigate, to minimise those to the greatest extent possible, to ensure our businesses are not badly affected, but importantly, our customers and our consumers don't end up bearing a greater load of cost. But there is a curtain of bureaucracy which now exists as a direct consequence between how we trade east-west, between Britain and here, between the north and moving into Britain. But there is also a huge curtain of bureaucracy now which exists between Britain and the European mainland also. So these are reflective of the new trading realities brought about as a result of Brexit. The job of work I think we have is with steady heads and a calm approach to ensure that we navigate those curtains of bureaucracy in a way, as I said earlier, that we do not see any disadvantage to either our businesses or to our consumers.
Thanks for that, Gary. Declan. Just one, if I can, please. And that's very clear. And you're right, because I would be supportive in some form of an SPS treaty with the EU that would help us an awful lot. So I would be supportive of that, and I hope the government are listening. The UK government are listening in regards to that. But could I just ask, how are we capturing the small business and the issues that the small business are facing? And some of these are very bespoke and very unique. So let me give you an example of this. So I was speaking to a car dealership down in Castledurg who does 60% of his trade across into the Irish Republic. But now, if he sells a car into the Irish Republic, the Irish Republic are putting 21% VAT onto the car. Now, that's not an EU issue. That's a trade border issue between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic, the very thing that the protocol was supposed to stop. How do we capture that information? How do we deal with that, apart from people like me sending that to various different people, say, have a look at this? But this person in Castledurg, in the border areas, and he won't be alone, is facing a trade border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic.
Yeah, it's really important that we do try and capture that, but in a systematic way. That's an instance there outside your constituency that's been brought to your attention. There have been other instances which have arisen within my own constituency, Doug, and the intervention is then made by myself as a constituency MLA and also as a minister, making the appropriate use of the access that I have to ensure that those business people who I'm talking about small mechanical engineers and so on, that they in fact have a way through the difficulty, the blip that they're currently encountering. That particular point, the low level stuff to which you refer, I think needs to be addressed in a systematic way by our officials. We need to ensure that we're gathering up all of that information so that it informs the kind of engagements which are taking place between our officials and those in Whitehall, but also our officials and their counterparts within Irish Revenue, so that where we're in a position to find solutions to those difficulties or indeed mitigations, because you're quite right, there are things happening at the moment that were not provided for. They're not consequences of the protocol. I can think of one instance myself just in relation to a steel tariff issue, where someone's become a casualty of what appears to be the incorrect application of the rules. So we need to scale up the understanding among our businesses, but we also need to ensure that there's a net created by our officials that the small traders, the small business people in particular, like the person you've referred to, doesn't actually fall between the cracks. So we've a big piece of work to do, I think, on an ongoing basis to ensure that these new trading realities, these new business realities on an all-island basis also are addressed in the appropriate way.
Thanks.
Gary,
yeah, just to add to that, I think that Doug actually makes a very key point in terms of that engagement piece, because we know, and I know certainly from this last 4 weeks in this role, I've seen the extensive engagement in terms of feeding in both the UK government and the UK government into the EU and vice versa. The difficulty being that whenever we hear of issues, and I take your point in terms of they can either, whether they be north, south, east, west, the fact is that there are certain groups out there and businesses who are very well connected, and you know, they do well for that in terms of they speak up for themselves in a sense that they're connected to particular large organisations and representative groups, and there's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely, you know, that is a place. But some of the smaller businesses, independent businesses, people who are just going about their day-to-day daily lives, and then they're hitting issues. It's reaching those people. I suppose that was one of the concerns, Doug, that we had raised in terms of the meeting with Sefcovic and the Secretary of State with businesses and representatives in Northern Ireland. We felt that it was important that you get beyond sometimes those who we always hear from, and it's important we continue to hear from them. But here's some of the other issues maybe that's been faced at a more localised level. I do think that could be improved. We need to look at how we do that. I think in fairness to the officials, what I have found in terms of our briefing papers that we get, they're usually very extensive, and we would raise the issues on obviously the people's behalf. But I think what we need to do in ensuring, especially the issues around the protocol, we need to be getting down to the nitty-gritty, if you like, and those very niche issues, and bringing those forward so that they can be addressed and that those people can be heard as well. So I take your point, and certainly we will take that away, Doug, and hopefully look at that again in terms of maybe those issues and how we bring them forward.
Declan, Gary, thank you very much. I did have another one, which was about exporting of bull semen, but I think I'll leave that for another day. Chair, thank you.
Yes, it's particularly close to dinner time, so I think we'll move on quickly, please, if we could, and maybe ask Trevor Lunn to come up into the spotlight if that's possible, and we'll get your question, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Hello, Gary. Hello, Declan, and congratulations, Gary. I'm interested in the point that Doug raised there, because surely I don't think the guy that he's speaking about is insinuating that there's double VAT being charged here. The VAT would have to be charged either in the Republic or else the North. And I mean, there's always been a significant cross-border trade, particularly in new cars, depending on the exchange rate. So I'll be interested to see how that one pans out. What I'm really looking at here is the manufacturing NI survey, and forgive me, I had to step out there for a few minutes, so I hope I don't repeat anything. But the manufacturing NI survey of business attitudes as of the end of January, it's actually quite positive. Businesses seem to be, they're doing what business does well. They're adapting, and they're finding ways to work the system, and they're probably getting more familiar with the new forms and all the certificates and all the rest of it. And really, I'll be very interested to see what the end of February survey says, because we're going to do one of these every month. Now, at the moment, you'd have to say it. Look at the overall results of that survey, that over half are at least reasonably satisfied with the way things have panned out, and some of them are making good progress, and they are, some are still saying they're currently struggling significantly with new process, but it's likely to ease. That's one of the answers. That's 28%. So would you agree with me? I mean, I know there's a big political discussion going on here, and that's politics is what politics is, but business appears to be finding a way to me. Is that a fair comment?
Good to see you, Trevor. Yes, I think it is. Business people are problem solvers.
Yes.
They're solution focused, and the survey returns that you reference are in the public domain. What I have picked up myself, again anecdotally and through a number of my own discussions, is that the customs situation, the customs difficulties are improving. That many companies, as you said, are adapting, and that extends even into the agri-food sphere, where there are significant enough requirements which need to be met. So I do think that our business sector typically is adapting to the new circumstances and finding ways through. Our job, I think, is to ensure that their efforts are given greater resilience from within the institution of government, and that we are constantly bending our efforts to ensure that they are assisted in how that's done. And I think that there is much more that can be achieved as a result of the direct engagement between the European Commission and the British government on that two-way street basis that I mentioned in response to Colin's initial question. If the British government is fulfilling all of its requirements under the protocol, then that clearly gives you leverage in relation to seeking additional assistance from the European Commission, additional, if necessary, flexibilities to ensure that life is made easier for business, for trade, for commerce, because ultimately, and I think many businesses do see it in these terms, we have dual market access for all of the cant and the negativity around the protocol itself. It has found a way through that curtain of bureaucracy that has now been thrown up as a result of the decision to Brexit, to leave the European Union. It has created a landing zone for many businesses who put their minds to work, come up with solutions. They want to find a way through in order to not only maintain markets, but find new markets. There's a perfect opportunity now to have a, if you will, an each way bet for businesses in relation to exploiting the benefits of the internal market with the British state, but by the same token, having full access to the 450 million consumers who constitute the European Union single market.
Trevor, thanks, Chair. Just to come in on that as well, I haven't the figures, and I did read the survey, and I think that those surveys are very much useful. What I would say is that in terms of going forward, I note Declan's point in terms of the dual access point. The difficulty being with that is that access from GB to Northern Ireland is not unfettered. Okay, despite commitments that have been given, effectively GB is a third world country to Northern Ireland. That's effectively what the protocol has done, and that should never have been, because what should have been is the UK as a whole should have been on the same terms and left on the same terms. So effectively, it's created a situation where Northern Ireland's largest market in GB is detrimented by the current situation. So I take your point in terms of businesses, but and some of those businesses who were surveyed. But to look wider than that, the implication goes beyond. And if you look at individual lives in terms of the impact that it's had on products coming in, whether that be through parcels, and again, there's going to be concerns in terms of the grace periods there. And I know that there have been concerns that many businesses in GB have decided just not to bother, not to even invest in this, because they're saying, look, it's not worth their while. But the other issue in terms of the stuff coming from GB is the cost impact on consumers here, but also the time, which is affecting businesses. So when we say we have dual access, we have to stipulate that with the fact that, well, we may have access out the ways, but that's not much use if all of the, we rely so heavily on goods coming from GB and products coming from GB to ensure we can manufacture our goods and export them. So in order to get dual access, in order for that to be successful, then we need to be having unfettered access with our main market in GB. That's the point I think that we need to make whenever we're talking about the best of both worlds, which obviously we don't have.
Yeah, well, thanks for that, Gary. And you and I would be on slightly different sides of the discussion in terms of the political aspect of it all. Unfettered was always going to be impossible to achieve at both fronts, either north, south, and east, west. But I mean, the point I'm making really is that if you looked at the situation just at the beginning of January, and it was just when business was gearing up to a new regime, it was pretty horrific. I would agree with you. Look at the situation now, and look at that survey, and that's done almost a month ago. Another one to come now in a few days' time, and let's just see where we are. So when I hear arguments about sausages and Christmas presents or birthday presents, I do wonder. I mean, have we not got sausage producers in Northern Ireland? Because for every complaint I hear about business difficulties here, you hear about somebody else who's found a business opportunity. And that's really what it's all about. We can trade both directions. But I'm not trying to get political here. I'll be interested to see what the next survey says. No question.
Okay, thank you, Trevor. Wouldn't be like us to get political in this committee now for sure, but thank you for not doing that. Can I apologise? I actually meant to bring Emma Sheeran in next because I know she's having difficulty using the raise hand function from the platform she's on. So if we could bring Emma Sheeran up into the spotlight, please, next for her question. And there we go. Emma, my apologies to you for that.
Chair, not at all. You're 100%. Thank you very much. And thanks to the two ministers. And I want to reiterate congratulations and welcome, or maybe it's commiserations I should be offering to Gary. I'm sure your workload has increased. My question is, I suppose, a bit of a deviation from what you have been discussing thus far. And there's all sorts of things that have been discussed since we actually left the EU, and problems that have arisen and different solutions. And I think people have touched upon the fact that our business people in the north and our producers are problem solvers. And I know I've been contacted by constituents with all sorts of different situations, and that is what's coming across, and perhaps a need for greater transparency or help from some local departments in terms of paperwork. But the thing I wanted to ask about was in relation to the rights of European citizens in the north, and people who are Irish people living in the north who value their European citizenship and value the rights that they were able to attain in the past by virtue of our EU membership, and want to see continuing on with their new arrangement. And I wondered, in light of that, how important it was that the North maintains sort of a bureau or an office in the EU, and how important that would be for ensuring that these rights are delivered, and on holding the different stakeholders, whether that be the Irish government or the EU or the British government, to account in terms of things like the EHIC and the Erasmus programme and different things that we have become accustomed to living in the north as an EU member state. So thank you. I'm wondering if you can expand on that.
Okay, yeah, I'm happy to go first on that particular question, Emma. The points that you raise in relation to rights are provided for under Article 2. So, I mean, the protocol, in my opinion, indemnifies, it entrenches the rights which citizens here enjoy under the terms of the Good Friday Agreement. And of course, the European Union is a stakeholder in our peace settlement and made a very significant contribution in terms of templates to the authorship and the creation of the Good Friday Agreement itself. So I think that we have to take it as a given that the rights of citizens here in the north will continue to be respected from whatever section of the community they come, whether they are newcomers who have made this place their home, whether they are of an Irish identity, a British identity. I think all of those rights need to be underlined and entrenched, and the provisions are there for that. Therefore, in terms of proper implementation of the protocol, then the guarantee of that rests with both the British government and the European Commission in respect of the specific change that we now have under the terms of the protocol. And the protocol was introduced as a protective mitigation measure, as opposed to something that was designed to in any way infringe or reduce or detract from citizens' rights. But with respect to the question you raise about the permanency of our European Bureau, in terms of our international footprint as a region, as a regional government, the three locations where we have Bureau are in the European Union, in the United States / North America, and also China. It's interesting that the Bureau with the largest number of personnel located within it is in fact our Brussels office. And I think that's reflective of the very close relationship that we have had within the European Union to date. And therefore, I just think that it would be counterintuitive not to think that we would continue to maintain a permanent presence within the European Union, with full access to the European Council, to the European Commission, to the European Parliament, to the full bureaucracy and institution of the European Union. I could not imagine that we would not want to do that on an ongoing basis, particularly in light of the fact that we now have the protocol. This part of Ireland has been taken out of the European Union under the terms of the withdrawal agreement. There's an interesting thought to conjure with, and that is that, in fact, under the terms of the protocol, the North now has a foot in both camps. We are like a half-sized state remaining within the European Union. And I think that's a good thing. I think it's recognition of our special and different circumstances. It confers upon us a special status. And I think an important platform for that special status conferred upon us by the European Union is found in the continued existence of the Brussels office in our European Bureau. So I do think it's very important that that continues in order to maintain a very high level of connection and interaction between our power sharing government, our assembly, with the structures of the European Union. That's how we'll ensure that, in fact, we optimise the reality of dual access to both the single European market and also then ensuring that we get best benefit from our continued access to the British internal market.
Obviously, Chair, I would take a very different view to that, but I do thank Emma, first of all, for her kind words of welcome. In terms of the EU office and in terms of the position, obviously we've left the EU. I think that there will always be a place for engagement, and we need to encourage that engagement. The difficulty being that what we've seen over the past 4 years is a situation where the European Union have effectively demanded, full respect for its workings, for its customs union, for its single market, and of course for the laws that they have. The difference being that they haven't shown the same respect in terms of the regard for the UK's laws, and of course in terms of, we talk about the Belfast Agreement, and we talk about the practical realities of Northern Ireland and how it works, and there hasn't been the same respect shown in that regard. So what we need to do is we need to work through the immediate challenges. Unfortunately, at this minute in time, what we've seen is a very much a tone-deaf approach to the rights of unionists, particularly within Northern Ireland, and the disregard for the agreements that are currently in place. But there's always room for discussion and engagement. And of course, and Emma, you mentioned around the likes of the Erasmus program, and those programs are important. But of course, the UK has announced the Turing program, which will be a worldwide program, which will benefit our citizens immensely. So what we need to do is ensure that we can get the best deal for our citizens here, and respect, of course, all views. But unfortunately, that hasn't been the situation to date.
I think we need to avoid a situation where we end up conflating how we manage new economic and trading realities given rise to by Brexit with identity issues and identity politics. So the issue of having a permanent office in Europe, in my view, it makes economic and political sense. We can sort out the political differences that continue to beset our society, the communal division within our society under the terms of the Good Friday Agreement. I think it's a mistake to bring those issues into the discussion around how we continue to interact with the European Union and the European Commission. And I do think that the Commission office that we have gives us a beachhead for ensuring that we stay properly focused in a pragmatic and a practical way on the real live, the real world economic and political issues that we need to deal with. And we'll deal with our political difficulties here at home.
Okay, Emma, are you happy enough there, or have you a follow-up question?
No, I thank the ministers for their answer. I think that, I mean, it'll not come as any surprise that I would sort of agree with Minister Kearney's reflection and assessment of things. And I do feel like there has to be a responsibility on all of us not to hype things up and not to conflate the issues that we're seeing at the minute, because, the Irish Sea border has always been there, and it hasn't affected British people living in the north from, it hasn't stopped them being British. And, unionists, I think, need to realise and acknowledge that they're still unionists, they're still British, and our new arrangement doesn't affect that. So I just feel like that's an important thing for us to take cognizance of. But thank you.
Okay, thank you. Members, we have three more members that need to come in and ask questions. So if I could do two things, please. If I could ask members to try and get as much of their questioning into one question or one statement with one or two questions, but get it into one input if we could. And then maybe if I could urge the ministers to rattle through their responses as quick as we can as well and keep them succinct, and then we'll hopefully get through everybody's questions. Okay. If I could ask for Trevor Clark to be brought up into the spotlight, please, for his question, and I'll pass over to yourself, Trevor.
Can I say just before I start, Chairman, maybe in reflection, maybe sometime you should take a wee bit of your own advice, because it's 4:20 and some of us haven't even spoken this meeting today. So maybe if you took some of your own advice and didn't hog the meeting at the start, maybe the rest of us had a bit more time. Can I ask Minister Kearney? In relation to the contribution yesterday, where his own member had talked about other opportunities, where it was pointed out to him the difficulties for trade coming from GB to Northern Ireland, where his colleague referred to other opportunities, how would he describe that as unfettered access for Northern Ireland?
I'm not privy to the particular comments that you're citing, Trevor. So I'll take your point in the context of unfettered access and the point that I made around our ability to have dual market access to both the internal British internal market and the single European market, and I think I've set my position out on that pretty quickly. I think that while most businesses operating in the north who would source goods in Britain have experienced some difficulties, they're going to be overcome. If you've got a manufacturer who's importing chemicals from Britain, once they crack the particular bureaucracy, that curtain of bureaucracy, the paperwork that applies, then the further compliance issues will be all the cheaper. I actually think that there are opportunities here where the advisors, and I referred this, and I think it was on a question that you put in the last meeting or a comment that you made at the last meeting, where British trade advisors were actually counselling British-based businesses in order to minimise expense and cost and bureaucracy that they were incurring by maintaining their economic relationship with the European Union to actually then set up subsidiary companies on the European mainland in order to be able to continue to trade effectively, but without the costs that they were going to incur on the basis of managing the new realities. It seems to me that to put this into some practical context, rather than British-based companies looking at setting up subsidiary companies in the European mainland with all of the costs, the setup costs that would incur, why not set up the additional structure here in the north, and then create a jump-off point directly into the 26 counties, and from here with the access that we have into the European market, and in fact ensure that British-based companies enjoy the same access that companies based here in the north would enjoy. Instead of having the cost of relocating to the European mainland, relocate subsidiaries here into the north and actually find a gateway opening up to them. Again, back to the point about practical solutions being found to some real world difficulties arising from the new economic and trading realities imposed by Brexit.
And I suppose you could say in relation to that, Declan, that sounds like a reasonable thing for businesses to do. But where businesses already have established themselves here, and indeed businesses in GB, and there has been a good trading relationship between both, and I mean, I don't put an awful lot of weight on what a particular radio show at 9 o'clock in the morning at BBC Radio Ulster says. But this morning they referred to 80% of businesses who did do business with Northern Ireland said they were going to discontinue that business from the 1st of April because of the difficulties of this fettered access as opposed to unfettered access. I mean, I think you and I will agree with one thing about traders in Northern Ireland. They will be imaginative and they will try different things. But you can't try that from a very small base overnight to retain employment and jobs for those people in those different locations. And indeed, they'll do it for economic reasons. They'll not do it because they're forced to do it. And that's what worries me, where businesses can't trade the way they've done. I mean, there was conversation, and I declare that has been involved in the motor trade for many years. But there's a simple one. Our lorries are going out on a weekly basis this time last year with loads of cars. And they're coming back with loads of cars. Now they can't do that. So their hauliers are being hit because of this. Now, there is no option for those people with transporters taking cars out and cars in because of the difficulties with this protocol. So there's one person who can't trade, because actually, as already been referenced by Doug Beattie, there's the trading problem between us and the Republic of Ireland with car trade. So we're hit both ways with people who are involved in the motor trade and the hauliers who are actually moving those cars.
And just in conclusion, to let Gary come in, Colin, not to hog this, I mean, those are practical, immediate problems. I don't think that they are systemic consequences of the protocol. Those are the kind of issues that need to be identified. They need to be isolated. And then we need to use the kind of engagement that we would have going forward through the joint consultative working group that has been inaugurated in order to actually find the practical solutions to those kind of unintended consequences that would arise. And I absolutely agree with you. Our businesses are very innovative, they're solution focused, but they also deserve help and support and assistance from us in relation to how they can optimize the opportunities that I think can exist for both continuing productive and profitable relations with the internal market, but also seeking out opportunities with the single European market as well.
Gary,
thanks, Chair. I welcome in briefly, just in terms of Trevor's point, well made around some of the figures of businesses, not willing to trade with here, given the position they've been put in through the protocol. The difficulty being that others who have decided to, whether it be crack the paperwork, as has been mentioned in terms of the phrase, the difficulty with that is that adds two things. It adds time to the process, but it also adds cost, and where does that cost be borne? And that therein lies the difficulty for us. And no matter what guidance you provide, it won't solve that problem. No matter what preparedness itself will not solve that problem. What we need is a situation where we deal with the challenges and the difficulties that have been placed between GB and Northern Ireland. And until we deal with those and recognise that those are real issues that are not going to be dealt with in terms of through paperwork, we need to recognise the fact that the GB market is our largest market. And until we do so and recognise that in equal comparison with how we trade with other jurisdictions as well, then it's going to remain a significant problem. And it's not realistic to suggest that look, everybody just move here. We know that there's business challenges even given the current pandemic. It's not realistic to just suggest that everybody move here and we can have dual access, because again, the difficulties arise whenever we're relying on GB goods being imported here, parts for products being imported here, and it can't be done. Therein lies the difficulty.
Okay, thank you, Gary, for that. So next up we have Pat Sheehan. If we could bring Pat up into the spotlight, please. Okay, Pat, over to yourself.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to read out part of an email I got there within the past hour, and it relates to our previous presentation from officials regarding the shared future funding. And this young lad called Aaron Hughes says, I am a T-Buck Young Ambassador with the Department for Communities. And having heard this news this afternoon, it has made me deeply concerned. And that's the fact that the shared future funding is being stopped. This programme has changed my life from development of my confidence to gaining essential qualification to get me where I am today. Life-changing opportunities such as travelling to Rwanda last August. I'm wondering, would the two ministers like to comment on that? Thank you.
Okay, I pass over. I appreciate that we're in a Brexit oral briefing, but I do think the point that's been made is, one, relevant. We've all received that email this afternoon during the meeting, but also because you didn't provide us with an appropriate paper before the meeting, we weren't able to prepare and ask the questions. So I think that's why the ministers are paid the big bucks, is that they have to occasionally be put on the line and asked the questions. So if you were able to give us an update on that, it would be really appreciated, because people are concerned out there. Gary, you want to?
Yeah, I can. I don't have a precise update. It's the first time I've seen the email, so I certainly am happy to come back with more detail on that. I do know that in terms of the executive position itself, the full replacement of the spending power previously derived from EU sources is very much something that will be taken forward. Now, I take your point around T-Buck and around I know this was confused in terms of the last contributions as well when the officials were in front of you. But I take your point around T-Buck and around the challenges that has placed. I know that myself and Junior Minister Kearney have been involved in discussions in terms of trying to ensure that funding is sustained going forward. Unfortunately, I don't have any more detail at this stage. As I say, I haven't seen the email, but I am happy to come back to you in the very near future. And again, apologies in terms of your briefing note and the briefing pack that you did not receive. But as you will appreciate, a lot of these issues change not only on a daily basis, but on an hour-by-hour basis. So I think that it is important when we get papers to you that it's up to date and as relevant as possible.
Declan, is there anything you want to add to that?
I haven't seen the email, Colin, but I'm very familiar with the programme. I may even have met that young guy. It does amazing work on the ground. It's transformational. And I just think that we are, in civic, community and political terms, selling young people like that short by a mile when we can't actually guarantee the resource that would allow for that kind of funding, that kind of programme to continue. We're in a very, very challenging period now with a flat budget available from this particular British government. I think that we face the prospect of a new era of austerity when we get to the other side, potentially, of COVID. when the full scale of an economic emergency will probably manifest itself. The lack of certainty in relation to our being able to rely upon continued access to European funds is frightening. It's good that our young people may have some degree of continued access to programs like, for example, and I know I'm raising a separate issue here, but I think it's all linked, such as Erasmus. But there are no guarantees attaching to any of that. So I think that in terms of both the funding resource that we can expect from the British Exchequer in the coming period, which is flat, and in net terms a reduction, and then with the imponderables that are thrown up in respect of the loss of European funding, that personal story that Pat has outlined is going to be magnified across the board among many young people that we know within our communities whom we represent and further afield.
Just to add, Chair, just very briefly, it is my understanding that we do have an engagement in March time with some young people, or certainly representatives in and around the Shared Future Fund. I'd be very happy to meet whoever the gentleman, the young person was in that email. I'm sure Junior Minister Kearney, without putting them on the spot, would be happy to have any discussions in terms of supporting our young people going forward. But thanks for raising that, but I will take the detail and come back to you on that.
Thanks for that. And just briefly, I wasn't trying to throw a curveball in, Chair. It's just I thought that, we know the budget is going to be very challenging. We know the British government are bringing us into another period of austerity. And sometimes the personal stories, here's a young man who has been given a great opportunity as a result of funding the Executive Office to be able to provide and a programme that the Executive Office was able to set up. And now the carpet is just being pulled out from under him. Declan mentioned the Erasmus project, which I was going to come on to as well. A similar situation there. Great opportunities for young people to go away and study in other European countries, to sample the life there, the culture, the language, and all the opportunities that go along with that. And now that is being taken away as well. So, it's disappointing in both these sort of programs that it's young people who are going to suffer as a result of Brexit on the one hand and the British government for austerity on the other. Not really a question there, but thank you.
Chair, just want to add, just in terms of the Erasmus scheme, I did mention just in the previous answer that obviously that's been replaced with the Turin scheme, which is going to be a worldwide scheme. Hopefully, young people will be able to benefit from that. It's just worth saying that, as I say, that has been replaced by the Turin scheme. And I think it is important that as an executive in all of these issues that, we prioritise. And of course, the Finance Minister, no doubt, will want to be prioritising in terms of how he puts his own vision forward as well. But as I say, thanks to Pat for that.
Okay, then finally, if I ask Mr. Stalford to be brought into the spotlight, please, for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, the practical outworkings of the protocol only sort of 60 or 70 days in have demonstrated that it creates barriers to trade. But I want to raise an issue which I think is actually just an example of cruelty. As a consequence of the protocol, it is difficult for people who are blind or visually impaired to travel with their dogs. This is because guide dogs travelling from Great Britain to Northern Ireland are being classed as pets. This, I think, is an example of where the inflexibility that was talked about needs to be addressed. In the last 10 years, 250 puppies have been trained to become assistance dogs in Northern Ireland through the breeding centre in England. And as a result of the arrangements that are in place, the supply of pups being taught has been suspended. they have to wait until they're around 15 weeks old, which is well past the point for their development. Now, I think that that is an example of just how the inflexibility is not only having a negative impact in terms of the economy, but on human beings and their everyday lives. And I think it's important that these issues are highlighted because economic arguments can sometimes be very abstract. I think an example like this, and also the invocation of Article 16 by the European side to attempt to restrict the vaccine supply coming to the United Kingdom, was another example of how these arrangements put in place represent a sort of Damocles hanging over our head that can be used against us to hurt people in a very practical sense. I know that Declan will disagree with me fundamentally on that, but I think those who argued for rigorous implementation of this should have been very, very careful about what they wished for. There's no question there, but if someone wants to speak to it, they're welcome to.
Okay, over to yourselves. Declan?
I'm happy to come in and respond, and I appreciate it's more a statement than a question, Christopher. I couldn't agree more with you about the difficulty that that particular instance that you've cited throws up. I mean, it is wrong. It's very, very challenging. It's a very, very difficult situation for someone with visual impairments who's a disabled member of our society is then disadvantaged in that way, and that needs to be resolved and fixed. So I do know that the issue of pets, and that would extend to pets who are assistants for people with visual impairments, and was in fact discussed along with the issue of the chilled meats issue, medicines, parcels, at that specialised committee meeting that took place yesterday. We have, through the XO meetings, since the beginning of the year, raised all of those issues, Christopher, repeatedly, including the issue of guide dogs and pets. We've argued, actually, that what's required is a passport for pets of all description to be able to move back and forward without any impediment, in order then to ensure that citizens, like you've described, are not in any way disadvantaged or having their rights disproportionately infringed upon. So they need to be fixed and they need to be resolved, and it is a cruelty that someone has to live with that kind of difficulty on top of an existing disability. But set into the broader context, the fact is that the British government have been involved in these negotiations now for years. We had previously an agreement struck by Theresa May. There was a backstop agreement that arguably would have provided greater levels of flexibility and a much better landing zone for so many of these issues than has been created as a result of the hard Brexit that was finally fought for and secured. And then as a consequence of that, the protocol has emerged. But regardless of our different political points of view on these points, Christopher, Boris Johnson had the shape of this in 2019. He knew what was coming down the track. There were no surprises in relation to the kind of issues that were going to have to be addressed arising from the protocol itself. And if I can just make one final point in the broader economic sense of all of this, Colin, because rightly so, these have been issues that have been raised during the course of today's meeting, SPS, checks, and so on and so forth. Bearing in mind this, in the course of the negotiations, this particular British government negotiation team could in fact have gone for something different. They could have chosen to go for a greater alignment with the EU's food safety rules, much along the lines of what Norway and Switzerland have secured with the EU. And that would have actually ensured that there would have been much less friction. It would have created a different pathway on some of these particular issues that I listed in relation to discussion at the specialised committee yesterday. We couldn't actually have avoided many of these difficulties if a much more enlightened and strategic approach had been taken to the negotiation in the first place. But the truth of it is, Boris Johnson and co saw this coming. They negotiated it with their eyes wide open. The job now for people like ourselves, for Christopher, for myself, for yourself, Chair, is now to ensure that we have a smooth operation of the protocol, and that we're very pragmatic, and that we're very solution focused in relation to how we do that, because we share the interest in representing and doing best by all of our citizens, and I know that's common ground that we have between us, and I think that has to always have primacy.
Gary, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, Chair, just very briefly, and apologies, there's some sound difficulties there. But what I would say is that what Christopher's highlighted just highlights I suppose, the direct interference that's been had in our everyday lives. And, that pet example is one case, which is a very sad case, but it goes beyond that. It goes in terms of, whether it be in terms of medicines going to our NHS here in Northern Ireland, whether it be in terms of seeds, soil, parcels, second-hand cars, tractors. These are all issues which effectively are a straitjacket in terms of Northern Ireland, and that's what's been placed on us. So until we come to the realisation that these issues are beyond teething problems, that they are serious issues in terms of the internal workings with the United Kingdom, then we're not going to be able to resolve that. Time and time again, when people talk about solutions, solutions were put forward to these problems initially, and when the DUP were raising issues around e-customs and online declarations, small business exemptions, trusted trader schemes, bilateral agreements, all of these things were put forward and dismissed. We're now at a situation where the joint committee's having to come together again, and I do hope that they listen to the genuine concerns that are out there within our communities, come to a resolution, so that we can move forward and that Northern Ireland can be prosperous once again.
Okay, Christopher, you happy enough there?
Just one very brief point, Chair. I think the fact that the UK is, at the present time, aligned with EU rules. We haven't had any divergence thus far. These arrangements have only been in place for less than 2 months, or for less than 60 days. The fact that even with our existing alignment, these difficulties have been thrown up, I think demonstrates just how unworkable the situation is.
Okay, thank you for that, Christopher. I'm going to move on just to the final speaker now, because Martina Anderson did have to go at 4 o'clock, but as we're still here, she's come back again. So, Martina, we can bring you up into the spotlight and you can ask your questions.
Thank you very much. Some people might say I'm a glutton for punishment. I've been sitting swimming from 9 o'clock this morning, different meetings. But can I first of all congratulate Gary as someone who comes from this constituency on the position he has. And can I also, with your indulgence, just acknowledge the role that the Executive Office today played in the signing of the heads of terms for the City deal, inclusive growth. We had the Joint First Minister zooming in, as well as the Finance Minister, and that was deeply appreciated because, Chair, this financial package invested in Darien Strabane is the biggest financial package ever. And this is in the middle of all of this pandemic where hope and reality comes together to shape people's futures. So, and it's not aspirational, it's real, and it's a great news day for Derry. So just afford me the opportunity to say that. I want to say more of a comment, if you don't mind. There's probably too much I could say about the whole Brexit journey and where we're at now. But during the time of the discussion about Brexit, the vote about Brexit and the transition, I met with guide dog owners I highlighted that this would be one of the issues of what's being dragged out of the EU for some of us, and including the issue of funding. And, we were accused, those of us that were identifying these problems that was going to happen, of project fear and of scaremongering. And unfortunately, it has become project fact. So we have to work together. I am acutely aware of people's views about where all this has landed. There was going to be a harder border somewhere on the island of Ireland of being dragged out of the EU. So I'm very mindful of the work. I was listening to the two ministers before I had to go off, and I've obviously been following. I'm mindful of the Executive Office, the efforts that they are making to see what kind of resolution can be found to some of these issues, and also very mindful that we have a grace period that we can't waste. And I'm hoping that whatever kind of preparation that has to be done is being done, so that the grace period as we move forward, if it's not extended, then we don't waste it.
Chair, I suppose just to come in and thank Martina for the kind words. Obviously, I share her enthusiasm and support for what was announced today in terms of the Heads of Terms Agreement. I think that is a good news story. If only we had more of them, I think that we would be in a much better place. We can look forward to that, I think, and as been said, I think we need to congratulate all of those involved in that good news story. Just back to the point in around the guide dogs and the pets issue, it's an issue that's going to have to be resolved. We know, in terms of my information, Minister Poots he did have a meeting at the tail end of January in terms of trying to get some clarity, but he did say that he would allow some additional time for pet owners to become familiar with the new requirements, hence the reason that there would be no routine checks on or before the 1st of July 2021, although it was stipulated with the fact that they do reserve the right to undertake checks should there be suspicion of illegal activity or welfare concerns. There's ongoing engagement with officials on this matter. They're working with their counterparts in GB and, of course, in ROI as well. So it's an issue that we're going to have to come back to. But again, there's going to have to be a workaround because it's not practical, and I think it's causing a lot of offence to people, and it needs to be addressed.
Declan, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just a focal score. Colin, thanks. I think that we're now in what you could describe as process land. The protocol is here. It's here to stay. That was most recently acknowledged by the British Secretary of State earlier today. But it has been a public position articulated by Michael Gove and other senior British government civil servants in the course of the last few weeks, both at hearings within the House of Parliament and also the House of Lords. So it does not make any of us any less Republican or Unionist to accept the fact that it's here, that we look to the bigger picture, we find the common ground that we can share to ensure that businesses continue to prosper, that our consumers are not in any way disadvantaged, that those who rely upon guide dogs are in no way disadvantaged or have their rights any further infringed as disabled members of our society. That's the common ground that we have. And what we need to do is ensure that the two-way street requirement, which is shared by the European Commission and the British government to meet their respective obligations, is carried out to the full, that we are guardians of all of our citizens' rights, that we have a weather eye to ensuring that this protocol works smoothly as a reality. Whether we like it or not, it's here to stay and it's not going away. And we need to ensure that the provisions within the framework of the protocol are properly implemented. And where there is a need to actually find some flexibility or mitigation or easement, that those options are in fact properly investigated. If we can bring them into reality, that we do so within the framework of the protocol, because that's the framework that guarantees us critical positions going forward. And on that basis, I believe that if we work together and we have calm nerves, with steady heads, we're using the same kind of language, that we can have very significant leverage over the responsibility of the British government to do what it has to do, but also, importantly, as effectively a new half member of state of the European Union, that we exert the necessary influence and pressure on the European Commission also to ensure that it is meeting its obligations, and that these difficulties that we're experiencing at the moment are short-lived, and that we actually start to change the landscape that we're currently operating in. And most important of all, that we take the acrimony and we take the negativity and the hostility that has built up in the course of the last few weeks out of the debate around the protocol and out of the debate about how we ensure that these economic realities are properly managed by us all. I hope that's useful just as a final comment.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you, Martina, for that question. Can I thank both ministers for their attendance here this afternoon. I appreciate that the session has taken a little bit longer than was planned on the agenda, but given that there is so much, as the minister has mentioned, negativity and noise out in the community, I think it is so important that we take opportunities like this to lay out exactly what the views and what the perspectives are, and as well to acknowledge that they may be different views, but at least we all know within the realm of a committee where everybody stands. So I appreciate both of you for your attendance here today. And one thing I was conscious that we have probably missed from last week and this week, with the promotion of Minister Middleton, also was the promotion of Minister Lands to the Minister of Agriculture. And I suppose from this committee we should have wished him well in his endeavours over there as well. But to both of you today for your attendance, thank you very much indeed, and we wish you as well with your work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, members, then we will move on then to item 7, which is the Forward Work Programme. It's on page 191 of the meeting pack, and just to advise that the junior ministers, actually I think it was meant to ask them or whenever they were in, that they're unable to attend the committee on Thursday or Friday as proposed due to other commitments. So at this stage I think we're going to have to propose that we don't do that briefing in March, but we maybe will endeavour in the background to see if there's something else that can be arranged in the meantime. So that's where we are on the Forward Work Programme. The First and Deputy First Ministers are scheduled for the 14th of April. Maybe I could just ask if all members are on mute, because there is feedback coming through there. If
I say you deserve this man, is the highest compliment of which I am capable.
I think it's probably yourself, Christopher, if you were able just to pop on to mute there. Thank you. So the First and Deputy First Ministers are scheduled to brief us on the 14th of April, which will enable us to get the update then. We will write to the junior ministers and ask them that we maybe at least get a written submission for that week at the end of March as well. On page 187 of the meeting pack is the information about the overview of questioning skills. Shall we schedule that for Wednesday, the 5th of May? We can adjust that in the future. If needed, I'll take note dissent as consent there. Then we shall note the rest of the work programme if members are happy enough.
Yeah.
Okay. In terms of correspondence, the correspondence are on pages 202 to 300 of the meeting pack, and there's 5 in the tabled pack. Are members content to note that, or is there any issues that members wish to raise?
Chair, there's one issue, if you can hear me.
Yes, go on ahead, Trevor.
The item 8.4, the letter from Mark Bassett and Professor Harvey in the Bar Library. They've offered to, they've issued a very interesting report, which is actually a year and a half old now, but still very relevant. And they've offered in the correspondence to assist the committee, as they put it, in considering the role of the Executive Office before and after any referendums in Irish unity. I think if we can find the time, I think that would be an interesting discussion to have with them. So I'd like to propose that we would accept their offer and bring them in sometime.
Can I second that proposal from Trevor?
And I third it.
There's a surprise.
Chair, you're on mute. We can't hear you.
It's just as well you didn't hear what I just said there, whenever you said that to me. Okay, so Clerk, if you could arrange for that there, please, and we'll get that fitted into the work programme. Thank you, members. Okay, item 9, any other business? Okay, then item 10 is the date, time and place of meeting, and that is next Wednesday via Starleaf again. Members, thank you very much indeed for your time today, and we'll see you all next week. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.